Good morning, friends.
Good morning.
During this very busy and stressful season of papers and tests, deadlines and deferred commitments, the lectionary has given us the rare gift of comfort and consolation in the form of some of the songs of Zion.
All right.
Early November is, in fact, a stressful time of the academic year. It's not just you. We're all feeling a little behind right now. And beyond our own academic concerns, we're experiencing a most troubling period of world events and political scandals all around. As a society, we seem to be living in unbalanced and fractured times, when the center does not hold and our world threatens to careen off course into ever more dangerous and absurd situations. Kohelet explains, with his typically melancholy words, "For in much wisdom is much sorrow, and to increase knowledge is to increase heartache." Sorrow and heartache. Indeed, wouldn't we all be happier if we were truly ignorant of children who die every day from preventable diseases, if we could turn a blind eye to ceaseless wars, domestic violence, hatred towards immigrants, and bigotry of all kinds? To obtain wisdom is to acknowledge the absurdity of much human experience, both personal and political. Our souls may currently feel like a dry and desiccated land, as Psalm 63 describes the existential weariness of those who long for the comforting presence of God. Our lectionary psalms today describe the joy of entering the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem as a means of literally coming near to the presence of God. They liken encountering God within these sacred courts to the visceral experience of being satisfied with a rich feast, or marrow and fatness, as the King James Version puts it. Think fried chicken drowning in gravy. These psalms offer a beacon of hope and comfort, which we are wise to accept, if only for a while, within the protected walls of this welcoming chapel. More strident members among us might have a different, more active and less contemplative disposition, of course. Steve Camp, for example, wrote a contemporary Christian song in the 1980s called "Run to the Battle" that begins with the line, "Some people want to live within the sound of chapel bells, but I want to run a mission a yard from the gate of hell." Sorry, Steve, but like the sparrows of Psalm 84, some of us might actually aspire to live our entire lives within the sacred precincts, if that were indeed possible. Similarly, the 23rd Psalm, the most comforting of prayers, ends with that extravagant wish that I may dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Well, we at Wake Div do not dwell in the courts of the Almighty, but we do have the luxury of living within the sound of chapel bells, at least for a time. So today, for a moment, we take a respite from the world around us, from the slings and arrows, to seek some comfort with the metaphor of pilgrimage to the courts of the Lord in Zion. Here are a few ways to approach this poetry. The 15th Psalm introduces our topic with more of an ethical bent. It asks the question thusly, "O Lord, who may abide in your tent, and who may dwell on your holy hill?" The answer is those who walk blamelessly and do what is right, and speak truth from their hearts, and who do not slander with their tongue, and do no evil to their friends, nor take up a reproach against their neighbors. There is no comfort for unrepentant sinners in the presence of the all-powerful and all-knowing, after all. Here the psalmist seems to see the courts of the Lord as a reward for a life well lived. The Psalms are indeed useful in pondering the possibilities of living a self-reflective and ethical human life. The very first Psalm, for example, meditates on the contrasting lives and actions of righteous and wicked humans. While the wicked are like chaff that the wind drives away, the righteous are depicted as trees planted by streams of water, which yield their fruit in its season. The Pharisee in our parable surely sees himself in the latter category. On a different tact, in ancient Israel, these songs of Zion are literal in their geography and functional in their application. Many were sung as marching songs as pilgrims walked for days to attend annual festivals in Jerusalem and to visit the actual temple built by Solomon, or rebuilt by Zerubbabel, or refashioned by Herod. Most of you know that I love a good pilgrimage to sacred places, And so I can imagine what it would be like to sing these songs while actually in the ancient shrine on the hill of Zion. But there has been no temple in Zion for almost 2,000 years. So Jews and Christians have had to use and appropriate and appreciate these songs in other somewhat metaphorical ways. Psalm 127 asks how anyone can sing one of the songs of Zion in a foreign land. With the temple in ruins in Jerusalem, how can one properly worship the Israelite God, encounter the sacred presence, or revel in the beauty of the courts that are now demolished? Ezekiel answered this question in the early 6th century BCE with the dramatic and detailed vision of the presence or glory of God actually abandoning the temple and going into exile with God's people. God says through Ezekiel that God's self, will be a small sanctuary for the people in a strange new land. Once the Persian Empire replaced the Babylonian Empire and the Jews were allowed to return to their ancestral land, the anonymous prophet of the last 11 chapters of the book of Isaiah quotes God as derisively asking, "Heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. What is this house that you would build for me?" He continues, "But this is the one to whom I will look, to the humble and contrite in spirit, who trembles at my word." This is the attitude of the tax collector in our parable, isn't it? Both Ezekiel and 3rd Isaiah seem to envision a spirituality in communion with God that is not tied to any sacred geography. Baptists like me like this kind of informal, mobile spirituality. This attitude will prove to be useful when the second temple is burned to the ground and Jerusalem is again abandoned in 70 of the Common Era. Indeed, some early Christians, such as Eusebius and Origen, had no interest in the earthly Jerusalem, since it had been transformed from the city of God to the guilty city for its rejection of Jesus as the Messiah. The temple had been destroyed by the Romans, and it was now the heavenly Jerusalem that mattered to them. No longer could one say, "I was glad when they said unto me, 'Let us go into the house of the Lord,' except in a spiritual or eschatological sense." Even while the temple was still standing, of course, Paul could explain to the Corinthians that we ourselves are temples of the Holy Spirit. He asks, "Don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in your midst?" After 70 CE, the Christian pilgrimage is thus more of an inward spiritual journey rather than a physical trip to Mount Zion. We are entreated to build a tabernacle in our hearts rather than to travel to external temple or tabernacle. Some of us want our churches, of course, to replace the house of God in Jerusalem, but surely they cannot replace the unique and sacred precincts of the temple of the Lord. That's me being a Baptist again. Of course, the Apocalypse of John, or the book of Revelation, encourages us to await the new Jerusalem that will descend from heaven to host the marriage supper of the Lamb in a city lacking a temple. Indeed, Revelation 21:22 states that for its temple is the Lord God and the Almighty and the Lamb. But the metaphor still works. We can read, chant, and sing the songs of Zion as a foretaste of the heavenly courts where we will present ourselves before the Lord. Likewise, the parable from Luke 18 works as well in a synagogue or house of prayer as its original Thanksgiving setting, in my opinion. The two men present themselves before the Lord seeking justification. While the more pompous man would boast of his ethical behavior and attitude towards sinners, as objectively defined, the tax collector asked only for mercy. The tax collector in our parable surely knew Psalm 131, which reads, "O Lord, my heart is not proud, and my eyes are not haughty. Indeed, I've claimed and quieted my inmost being like a sated child upon its mother. Like a sated child upon me is my soul." Like a baby with a full belly, the psalm says, like a sated child upon its mother's breast. We can find some comfort and solace in the presence of the Lord, even in these chaotic days, when we have built a tabernacle for the Lord within our hearts. But I need to end where I began, because none of us does in fact dwell in the house of the Lord forever, at least in the present version of earth. We do need to go out into the world and confront its evils. Even the most comforting of the Psalms, of course, does not deny the existence and the presence of evil. Indeed, it explicitly affirms the darkest valley, or more poetically, the valley of the shadow of death, and the threat of dangers to the defenseless sheep. There are enemies in our midst, according to that poem, but the psalmist affirms that we have a friend, a shepherd, who is prepared to face such enemies on our behalf. Literally, the shepherd is armed with weapons, a club and a big stick, as Teddy Roosevelt would say, that offers comfort to those of us who roam about unarmed in a hostile world. The novelist and Presbyterian minister Frederick Buechner lessens our anxiety at this paradox by offering the good news in the midst of the bad. He explains that even though the world is full of tragedy, it is ultimately not tragic. Quote, because as Jesus tells us, the world has the kingdom buried in it, like a treasure buried in a field, like leaven working in dough, like a seed germinating in the earth, unquote. It is the grace of wisdom that allows us glimpses of this peaceable kingdom, sprouting like a seedling within the world's chaos. And it's human faithfulness that allows us to respond to the call to nurture it. And that call, that response is, of course, your vocation. You already know what vocation is, of course. As Buechner put it, your vocation in life is where your greatest joy meets the world's greatest need. So as you go forth from this place, strive to realize your vocation within a broken world. Seek honesty in the face of a hurting world. That's what theologians do. Acknowledge the sorrow and the absurdity of our lives, but work towards redemption nonetheless. That's what we believers do. Let us work to address the needs of the hungry, thirsty, stranger, naked, sick, and imprisoned. That's what Jesus requires of those who follow him. Let us become co-workers with God for the healing of a world that hungers and thirsts for righteousness. Let us love our neighbors and not condemn them, even if their politics and attitudes seem hateful and deplorable to us. Don't be like the Pharisee in our parable, who's objectively moral in his actions, but puffed up in his self-righteousness. Perhaps we shouldn't practice virtue signaling to show that our side of the political aisle is morally superior to the other side, even if it really is. As the prophet Micah says, what does the Lord require of you? To do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with your God. So let us walk humbly with our God, daily seeking both the mercy of God and the grace of God. William Barclay has said that conversion is not simply submitting to the overwhelming power of God, but rather surrendering to the grace of God. That God's chesed, loving kindness, should break our hearts wide open to receive a gracious plenty, as though we were guests at a wonderful banquet, where our cup runneth over. We have comfort in the present and hope for the coming banquet, the marriage supper of the Lamb, who sacrificed himself for others. And having received such compassion and grace, we should be compelled to offer passion and grace to others, including our enemies. So take comfort. Even our stressful and fractured world, the Lord has prepared a place for you in the house of the Lord. Come, all who would accept the invitation.
Amen.